What's up everyone, it's Nick Valenti with NJ Valenti Art, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to use layer effects in Affinity Designer. Layer effects are a great way of making certain elements of our illustration really pop. You can see here in a couple of examples that I have set up how we could use the layer effects to really add to even just these basic shapes here and create something a little bit more with them. So I'm going to show you how you can use these various effects and break them down a little bit further for you to use in your illustrations. So going back to our main shapes, we'll go ahead and select our rectangle shape here, and we'll come and look over here at the Effects tab in our Layers menu. And you can see here we have various options: Gaussian blur, outer shadow, outer glow. We even have things like 3D color overlay or gradient overlays. So if we were to open up, say, Gaussian blur here, this little drop down menu gives us a radius, and if we slide this out you'll see what happens here. You see the edges of the rectangle getting fuzzy and blurring. So we could control how much that blurs with this slider here, and I'll max out at 100 pixels. You can enter your own numeric amount for the pixels and it'll blur it even further, so it's not limited to just the 100 pixels, but you can go beyond that. But we'll go ahead and dial that back just a little bit so you can see how much it really affects it. And now this effect works really well if you have an object in the foreground of your image that you want to have blurred out, or even something that's set a little bit further back. You'd be able to use the Gaussian blur effect to kind of push that shape or object a little bit further away from us. If we unclick that box, it gets rid of that effect. Coming down to outer shadow, we'll go ahead and hit that drop down menu here, and we'll turn this one on. And you can see it's given us this outside shadow to our shape, and that's being dictated here. We have an opacity selector here. We can make that lighter or darker if we'd like to. Also the radius, how far out we want it to actually fade. Do we want it to be a pretty tight, close shadow, or do we want it to blur out and fuzzy the edges more so there? And then the offset here is how far away from the object or that shape do we want that shadow to be cast. And again, we could push these numbers even further than just the 100. So we try 200 there. You can see it really gives a lot more separation. We'll dial that back to 100. We can also change the angle at which this shadow sits. So right now it's at a 315 degree here. We could just simply grab this blue line and drag it. And you can see how the shadow then will correspond with where this blue line of the angle is. So now it's 180 degrees, so we have it off to our left side. We can bring it straight down if we were to have a light source at the top, or even a light source coming below. And you know, well, by checking this, it enables the effect, and unchecking it will get rid of the effect. Alright, let's come over here to our diamond shape, and we'll move on to inner shadow. So this is going to work similar to outer shadow, but you may have guessed it, as opposed to the shadow being on the outside, it will now be on the inside of our object. So again, we have our opacity. We'll bump that opacity up a little bit, and we'll pull this radius up as well. And you can see how the shadow starts creeping in from the inside now of our shape. We can change the offset as well. So even by doing this, it makes it look like this is pushed further away from us. So we can change with that offset, and say we bring it back down to 0, but maybe play with the radius a little bit and bump this up again to 200. See how much more that shadow comes in, which is a pretty nice effect. You can also change that shadow color by coming up here. So if we wanted to have more of a pinkish color, we can have the pink coming in the sides. But since it's a shadow, we want to stick with the more saturated, darker colors for it really to read. The whites and the lighter colors don't show up quite as well. But we'll get to an inner glow here in a few minutes. So I was looking pretty cool with that pink, so we'll go ahead and do that. Various ways of being able to use that. Now coming down here, we'll stick with our diamond shape and we'll take a look at outer glow. Outer glow will give us a glow that surrounds the object. So we've got the opacity set to 100%. And I'm just going to go ahead and push this radius up. And you see how much it kind of starts to glow from behind the object, which is pretty cool and works well with the inner shadow here, the light coming from behind and casting that shadow along the edges of the shape there. I think this would look pretty cool with a bumped up radius. Let's again try the 200 there. Now it's really popping and glowing even more. This little cogwheel, if you go ahead and click on that, it'll bring up a larger menu. If you'd prefer to work with this, it has the same selections that we've been working with this whole time, but also up here, it gives us a blend mode. And we can change that blend mode. Since it's just the white color on the background, it's not going to affect anything too much, but a soft light would give us a much softer, subtler glow. Hard light becomes very harsh again, and that would change a little bit too based on what color we have selected, but right now we just have that plain white selected. So we can even just leave that at overlay or screen, which it was on originally. Taking a look at our ellipse, we're going to take a look at our inner glow. And this is going to be very similar to inner shadow and work very much the same way. We'll go ahead and change this to maybe a nice teal color, bright teal. Now let's expand this radius. Bump this one up again. So opposite to the inner shadow, it now gives us an inner glow to the shape. So then coming back up here, and let's just throw a drop shadow on this one quick. Get the opacity up, push that out, and we're going to push the offset we want it to be there. And let's try changing the angle of that as well. Alright, so now we've kind of kicked that down there. Alright, working with our triangle here. The next layer effect we have is outline. So go ahead and click on that, and we have the opacity set up here to 100%, and if we just play with the radius here, you'll see that this basically adds a stroke to our shape. Play with the opacity a little bit if we wanted to. So outline is pretty straightforward, pretty basic. Just pretty much adding a stroke to our shape. The next one we have is 3D, which is a pretty neat one. This one, when we play with the radius, you can see how this shape becomes very 3D, very three-dimensional. Now, opening up the larger menu, we do have more options here in the 3D section. We could continue to mess with the radius of that, how much we may want to soften that shape, our opacity, how noticeable that effect is. We could diffuse the color. We can strengthen this specular highlight here along the edge. Do we want it to be a little more subtle, or do we want it to really stand out? And the overall shininess. Our specular color, this highlight along the edge here, we can change that. Do we want to make it a little more red? Or have it pink, so we can change that color, the specular highlight. The ambient light is the overall lighting of the shape. So say we change this specular highlight to more of a pink, and maybe came in and messed around with the ambient color a little bit and made it almost a little more teal. So some various ways that you can play with that. You can also add additional light sources or remove those light sources. We'll go back to the one light source here. So back to the one light source, we can play with where this light is hitting the actual shape, so then where it'll cast the shadow and where the specular highlight would be. Specular highlight, that the edge that's closest to our light source is always going to have that specular highlight. And you can see the degrees changing based on where we are moving our light source. Okay, and we can change that light source color as well. So the 3D feature, the 3D layer effects, is pretty cool, and there's certainly quite a few features to mess around with and adjust to your liking. Moving on down our list, we'll take the 3D effects off that one for now. We've got bevel and emboss. I'll go ahead and hit this cog and pull this menu up here. Now it gives us different types, so we can change the bevel and emboss. So right now we're going to just experiment with pillow. Change the radius of it. We can soften the overall effect. We can change the light source direction. We can also again change the highlight color and the shadow color as well. So some similar options to 3D. If we go to emboss, it'll change the overall look that we have. We'll be dealing with just the outer portion of our shape or just the inner portion. And pillow is a combination of all those effects, affecting the inside portion of our shape as well as the outside of our shape as well. Now after bevel and emboss, we do have color overlay. This one is pretty straightforward. If you want to change the color of an object, you would simply come in here and replace it with whatever color you may like. You can also change the blend mode. So basically, with that new pink color that we changed it to on a multiplier layer, interacting with that purple underneath gives us this cool indigo. So you can mess around with the layer effects as well. If you want it just to completely change the color totally, you would leave it on normal. If you want the new selected color to interact with the background color you had previously, you'd be able to use one of these other options as well. After the color overlay, we also have a gradient overlay option. And this will be pretty straightforward. We can affect the overall opacity. We could change our gradient from a linear gradient to elliptical, radial, or the conical. And then this will affect where exactly our gradient is coming from. We can offset the gradient as well. How much light and dark do we want? And here we could change the angle of the gradient as well. When it comes to the layer effects, I don't typically use the gradient overlay or color overlay quite as much. Typically in a situation like this, I would just use the gradient fill tool, or if I did want to change the color of an object, I would probably do so just directly or through layer styles, which we'll cover in a different video. So that kind of sums up overall a breakdown of all the various layer effects that we have in Affinity Designer and how you could go about using them to create those effects and manipulate them. Now I'd like to go ahead and show you how we can combine those various layer effects to create some really cool ways of making our art. Alright, so let's talk about how we can combine some of these layer effects to really make elements of our art pop, especially if we were to use gradients along with the layer effects. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to show you how to create this one here. It'll be great for a moon. So I'm going to show you how to pull that effect off, and then we'll look at creating this heart here as well. First, we want to go ahead and grab our ellipse tool, and holding shift we'll click and drag to make a perfect circle. Fill that with white color for now is fine. Select our gradient fill tool, and we'll click and drag from the middle outward, coming up here and changing the gradient type from linear to radial. Kind of center that up a little bit. So I really want this glow coming from the center and going out towards the edges. We can come up here and even change these colors a little bit. Something maybe a little more blue, or maybe even, yeah, we'll stick with the blue for now. Kind of an effect like that. Now once we've got our gradient set with our ellipse selected, we come over to our effects, and the two effects that we're going to want to concentrate on here to get that look. So we're going to want to start with an inner glow. Keeping the opacity at 100, I'm going to pull this radius in. Probably somewhere maybe around here. And now I can come in here and play with the opacity of it a little bit to make it a little more subtle. We really just want those edges to kind of glow, and I could mess around with the radius a little bit more. So I want a nice slight glow there. And we're going to come up here to outer glow to give us this nice full bright halo around, coming from behind the circle itself. I'm going to push this radius all the way out. I'm actually going to even bump this up quite a bit, probably somewhere around, we'll try 500. And that'll give it a pretty nice spread there. So just like that, we've created a very bright looking moon. We've got our radial gradient with an inner glow and our outer glow. So that brightness is really wrapping around the form and giving us a nice inner shadow and a bright highlight there. For the heart shape in our shapes menu here, if we click and hold, you can see the various types of shapes that we have available: donut, arrows, square. We even have call out ellipses. So I'm going to go ahead and stay with the heart. I'm going to drag. So I've got a nice looking heart there. For this one, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change this over to purple. Select a gradient fill tool again, click and drag. I'm going to once again select the type and change it from linear to radial. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take my lightest color here, make it just a little more pink. I want it to be quite bright. Now you can see how using the radial gradient I can really get this nice full curvature of the heart, giving it quite a bit of depth. So we're really only kind of looking for something like this. We want our brightest spot to be closer to where our light source may be coming from. And click and drag this around till we feel like it's hitting all the areas that we want, and I think that looks pretty good there. So for this heart shape, we're going to want to go ahead and we'll use the outer shadow here. We'll bump that opacity up and the radius on that. And now I want our offset to be on the opposite side of our light source. So if we have our light source hitting this heart from the left-hand side, I want the shadow to be cast on the lower right side. I could change the opacity of that. If I make the opacity real high and make it very dark like that, this gives you the sense that the heart is sitting very close to the surface, casting a very strong shadow. Whereas if we were to lighten up the opacity just a little bit, it makes that heart float a little bit further away from the surface, which I think works well here because we really want it to have that rounded feel to it. And then other than this outer shadow, we also want to come back in here and we will also add an inner glow. Come up here and push the radius maybe about 3/4, and then push back the opacity just a bit. Kick that up a little bit more, lower the opacity even more. I want this to be a very subtle effect, but what this is doing for me here is the light source is hitting the top of the heart and casting the shadow behind it, but there is light moving past the heart and hitting our background, which then bounces back up to this side of the heart. So this is kind of creating for us a bounce light effect and really help adding some dimension to the heart overall. One more way of really pushing this would be to come up to our ellipse tool and create an ellipse up here for our highlight. I'm going to turn this white. Gradient fill tool. We'll select and drag from the center. Change this to radial. And we're going to take the darker node here and we're going to change this opacity down to 0. Bring these handles in just a bit. So make this shape a little bit larger. And then there's our specular highlight, hitting the highest point of the heart. Now something else we could do is we can also add a layer effect to this specular highlight. And this one, I'm going to go ahead and use the Gaussian blur. And now you'll see what happens as I add some blur to it. It really makes that fuzzy and really helps it blend more in to the overall color, creating a much more natural look and feel to that specular highlight, much like we have in the example over here as well, where it's even just a little more subtle. And we can continue to play with that shape a little bit to get it exactly where we would like. So those are some ways that we can go ahead and combine the various layer effects and adding gradients as well to really make those elements of our art pop. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. In the comments below, let me know how you use layer effects in your illustrations, and keep chasing your dreams. Until next time.